And this morning we're talking about something very interesting. We're talking about semantic satiation. Somebody say semantic satiation. Yeah, have you ever said a word so many times it loses its meaning? If you have been in that place, you have experienced semantic satiation. They actually did an experiment on cats. Why cats? You know, for all the non-cat lovers in the world, you understand exactly why. For all you cat lovers, you know, you're like, I don't understand. But why cats? So here's what they did as an experiment to cats. They would play a tone whenever the cat would begin to go to sleep to wake the cat up. And so over time, what they would do is they'd play the tone, the cat would wake up. And what they found was the more that they would play that tone, the less often the cat would wake up until eventually the cat didn't wake up to that tone anymore, to which then they kind of switched the tone and then the cat woke up again. And so it's that same thing with semantic satiation. If you ever hung out with parents before, like of kids, and their kids, like it is a world war happening in the background, and the parents are just locked in, and they're talking with you like nothing else is happening. You're like, literally, I can't pay attention for 1 second right now because your kids are literally beating each other over the head with wooden pipes. You know, like, how is this possible? And yet, the parent doesn't notice. Why? Satiation. Because they don't understand. They don't even hear it anymore. It just happens, and they're like, is there anything actually happening? It's that same thing that's happening with semantic satiation. I do this with words, believe it or not. So the word like literally. Anybody use the word literally, non-literally? Like you mean it figuratively, but like literally. It was the best thing I've ever experienced. Oh my gosh, literally. It blew up. And you're like, really? Literally? You see, the more that I use that, the more that I realize it's probably not actually literally. Or how many of us use the word awesome? So I do this. If you say yes to going out to coffee with me, some of y'all like, man, if you say yes, it is actually awesome. I'm like, wow. Like literally, Jesus is about to come back. You said you're going to have coffee with me. Some of y'all, it is awesome. Some of the rest of y'all, though, I like type back and you say like, yeah, I can meet at this time. I'm like, awesome. You know, sometimes not so awesome, but it's semantic satiation. I'll say there are a few words that we probably experience this more with than a 4-letter word, love. Love. Because the crazy thing is this, that you can go from I love Jell-O to saying I love rock concerts, to saying I love my kids, to I love my job, and all of those things mean something very different until the word love loses all meaning. We experience semantic satiation when it comes to love. You see, love sometimes feels like winning the lottery for some of us. That if you just keep trying enough, that eventually, if you try long enough, then you might happen to strike gold. But the chances are many of us won't. So some of us look at love and we feel like it's winning the lottery. Some of us look at love and it's like eating healthy. You know, you feel like it's something you're supposed to do throughout the day, but you feel like you're always missing out from something else. And you get to the end of the day and you wonder, man, I really wonder what I missed out on, right? Because you feel like, man, I should be loving people. And so you try to do it. It's not all that fun. And all of a sudden you're like, but what is love really all about? And so today I want to talk about this. A second chance on love. A second chance on love. Some of us have experienced, and when we think about love, we have maybe some good experiences. Some of us, maybe we have mixed experiences, or maybe there are even some of us who don't feel that great about love. The moment we bring it up, there's conjuring up of bad relationships or bad experiences or people who are supposed to be there who hurt us. And so today I want to just invite us into a second chance on love. You see, we're in this sermon series called Ecclesiology, which is the study of the church. And the study of the church has way more to do with how we act toward one another than it does the building that we meet in. So when you say, I'm going to church, let's correct that a little bit. You know, we call this place HQ because it's headquarters. This is where we meet up and we talk to each other, but you're the church. Turn to the person next to you and say, you're the church. Okay, so if you don't like the church, go ahead and turn to the person next to you and say, I don't like you. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Don't do that, right? Because the church is the people of God gathered together. So whether you're gathering together in a home or if you're gathering together in a building like this, the church are the people of God. And the question is, what if you and I actually lived out what Jesus invites us into? What if when people came into this place, they experienced things like unity and grace and holiness? And what if the world actually experienced a church that was full of the four-letter word love. Just want you to take a moment right now. Just kind of, maybe some of y'all are going to close your eyes. Maybe you don't trust the person next to you, so don't close your eyes. Don't get distracted. But I want you to imagine what it would feel like to show up to a place where people love each other. I want you to imagine, what kind of things are they doing? What are they experiencing? When you walk in, does it feel like your soul has found a home? Does it feel like you have a place that you can fit in? When you walk into your house at the end of a day and you picture love, what do you picture? You see, the Bible is all about this idea of love. It's one of the most important things that we can incorporate into our life. And so the question is, well, listen, then what is love? And so really the truth is that we see love in a couple of different places. John chapter 13, verse 35. This is the interesting thing. Jesus is talking to his disciples, and here's what he says to his disciples. He says, "This is how everyone will know that you are my disciples, by your bickering and infighting." This is how everybody knows that you're my disciples, by the miracles that you see happen. When you see somebody grow a third limb, that's how everybody will know that you're my disciples. No, here's what Jesus says. Everyone will know you are my disciples if you love one another. What Jesus is saying is, listen, when people look into the church and they look at the people of God, they will know if you are my disciples, if you love one another. Jesus says this when somebody comes up to him and asks, what is the most important commandment? Jesus boils it down to these two ideas. One, love God, and two, love others. It's so important that 1 John chapter 4, verse 8 says this. The one who does not love does not know God, because God is love. Can you believe that the Bible and God is so much about love that literally the Bible says God is love? It doesn't say the Bible that God is compassion or God is miracles or God is this energy force. No, it says God is love. So if all of that is true, then why does it seem like we have such a hard time loving one another? Why is it when we go down the street and somebody asks, or we talk about church, that oftentimes the first thing that comes to their mind is not love? Many times what comes to their mind is judgment, or feeling like they're out of place, or feeling like they could never show up there. What if God began to change his church to look more like love? And if I could be honest with you, I kind of wish that I was sitting right here today. You can look at the bald spot on the back of my head. I wish I was sitting right here today listening to this message, because the truth is that I feel like out of everybody showing up today, I feel like I could use this message. I feel like I wish that somebody else could come up and give this picture of love, because the truth is I feel like I'm offering 5 loaves and 2 fish today, that I'm sitting under this teaching just as you are, because I know that God has challenged me in so many ways of this idea of love. And I'm not speaking as somebody who has it all together. I'm speaking as somebody who needs this as much as you do as we talk about love today. So as we enter into 1 Corinthians chapter 13, what's happening so far is that the Apostle Paul has shown up in a place called Corinth. Now, Corinth is kind of a hub at the time. It was a place of culture. It was a place of commerce. And he went and he planted a church there. He went and he left the church because he went to go plant churches in other locations. And what happens when he left the church is that things began to kind of collapse in. And so there are a number of different things that he needed to confront. There were some different practices that were happening that Paul needed to speak into and begin to say, listen, there's a different way that you could live. And so one of those things is that in the church of Corinth, they began to talk about the gifts of the Spirit. Now, gifts of the Spirit, things like miracles, things like teaching, things like healing, and maybe even prophecy or words of knowledge or speaking in tongues. And so that was all happening in the church of Corinth. They were looking at these gifts of the Spirit, and they were thinking, man, I would love to have those things. They were seeking these ecstatic experiences. They were saying, man, if only I could have this crazy experience of God, if only I could chase after this crazy thing that only God could do, or I could hear God's voice, or whatever that might be. They were seeking after these experiences, and Paul begins to write them. And Paul says, listen, it's good for you to seek after the gifts of the Spirit. It's a good thing for you to seek after those things. But he says this in chapter 12, verse 31. He says, but desire the greater gifts, and I will show you an even better way. What he begins to talk to the church about is, listen, you could show up to church and you could see people healed. You could show up to church and you could have a word of knowledge. You could have people speaking in tongues. You could have all of these miraculous things happen. But if it's just about that, then you missed out on the essence of the church. And so Paul begins to say, I'll show you a better way. And then he turns to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I'm just going to read this whole passage, and I want you to listen, because this is probably one of the greatest message of prose ever written by humankind. Like, as we talk about love, this is the text that we go back to over and over again to learn what love really is like, and there's something about it that captivates us to the very essence of our being. Here's what Paul says. If I speak human or angelic tongues, but do not have love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so I can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, if I give over my body in order to boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy, is not boastful, is not arrogant, is not rude, is not self-seeking, is not irritable, does not keep a record of wrongs. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when the perfect comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put aside childish things. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I will know fully, as I am fully known. Now these three remain: faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. You see, this idea is actually situated in a larger story. That there was this understanding that for all of human history, we understood that we needed relationships. If you're going to make it back in the day, like, we needed one another. And so we would form these crews of people. And so you would have you and your crew, and you would go after food together, and you would keep each other safe, and you would protect one another. And you understood this idea of, I can love the people in my crew, because those are my people. And so if they keep me safe, I keep them safe. It makes sense. But then all of a sudden, there's this guy who steps on the scene. His name is Jesus. And Jesus shows up, and he begins to break all the rules. Instead of just loving the people who are in his crew, he starts to go out. He starts to love people who are different than him. He starts to love people who are thinking different than him. He loves people who don't even love him back. And so in that, we begin to look at this picture of Jesus, and we think, man, what is different about that guy? You see, because Jesus understands love not as the thing that you do toward your crew, but he understands love as the place you go on the cross. That Jesus loved those who loved him the least. And it was in that that we see what love is really all about. And so the story, as Paul is writing up until this point, is this idea of everything comes back to what Jesus did on the cross. And as he's writing to this church in Corinth, I don't want you to imagine that everything's going well. As a matter of fact, they're under persecution. They're under hardship. They're struggling. Things are difficult. If you imagine that this is being written to a church that has it all together and situation around it is easy, you would be dead wrong. As a matter of fact, as we look at the world around us, the question is this. It should be that every time things get harder, the church loves more. But oftentimes we see the inverse, that sometimes what happens is things get harder, the church loves less. Paul would encourage us and say, no. It's in that moment the church should love more. So 3 questions I want to answer today about love. The first one is this. The first question is, what is it? As you think about love, I think it's a lot like cooking, and it's a lot like raising a baby. That you can look at all the YouTube videos, you can go and you can read all the cookbooks, you can look at all the people who are already doing it, but the truth is that you only really discover what love is in the context of you getting out there and actually doing something about it. And so I think in some way, my hope would be as you go throughout this week that you would experience a new definition of love, but here's just kind of maybe an idea we'll throw out there about what love is. Love is a whole being commitment of self-giving for another. Love is a whole being commitment of self-giving for another. You'll notice that what happens is that Paul starts to talk about all these different spiritual things that you could do or you could be. He says, listen, you could speak in tongues. You could say spiritual things in all the languages of the world. But can I tell you that love is not in saying the right things? He says you could go out and you could actually do all of these spiritual things for people. You could actually give yourself over and give everything that you have. But love is not in what you say or in what you do. Love starts in the very core of your being and flows outward. And so we see that it's a whole being commitment of self-giving for another. That I actually, in a moment that I love somebody, I'm giving a part of myself. And I'm not loving them because of their worthiness. I'm loving them because it's who I am. And so Paul begins to encourage us that that's the kind of person and encouragement that you could do all of these things and you could look really spiritual, but if you don't have love, then you're missing out on what the truth actually is. Because it's a whole being, all of who you are, heart, mind, soul, and strength, commitment. Not that you're saying, yeah, when things are going well, then I'm in. It's not a one-night stand. You see, sometimes I think we treat love like, yeah, you know what, I'll do something really loving for somebody in this one moment, but the truth is that love is way less like a one-night stand, and it's way more like standing by someone until their last night. It's showing up over and over and over again and saying, I'm committed to giving to you. So maybe now that we've defined it, you're wondering, well, how do I live it? I love that Paul actually gives us how to live it. Here's what Paul says. He says, love is patient. It's kind. Doesn't envy, not boastful, not arrogant, not rude, not self-seeking. I just want to pause right there. You ever have a moment where somebody has had a challenging conversation with you, start calling you out? You see, what's happened already is that Paul has talked about the church in Corinth, and he's already said that you're envious, that you're self-seeking. And so he starts to call them out, like over all the things that he already said. Can you imagine sitting down with somebody and them talking about love and them talking about all the things you're not? And yet that's exactly what Paul does in this passage. He starts to talk about all of these things that they're not. And so he talks about this. He says, listen, love is patient. You ever notice there's this crazy, actually, way to say it in Hebrew, this idea of patient. It's known as the long nose of the Lord. You ever notice when somebody gets mad, they flare their nostrils? You know, like when somebody gets really mad, they're like, they start flaring their nostrils up. And so what happens is when it talks about the long nose of the Lord, what that means is that it takes a long time for the Lord to get angry. And so it's that same thing if you kind of imagine that somebody who's patient doesn't have a short fuse, they get a long fuse. Love is patient. Love is kind. It's actually the only time that this word shows up in the New Testament. It's actually the only time that this word really shows up. They think that Paul just took these two words and put them together of good and kind. And so he puts these two words together and he says that's what it should be like to be in somebody who loves, is that there's this goodness and there's this kindness that comes together, and every interaction they're looking for an opportunity to be good and kind toward you. And in case they didn't get it with the things that it is, he starts to talk about what it's not. He says, listen, love is not envious. It's not like you're looking at somebody and saying, man, they got that raise, and I'm super mad about it. I wish that I got the raise instead of them, right? It's not that. It's not boastful. It's not looking for an opportunity to raise yourself up. It's not arrogant. It's not rude. It's not self-seeking. It's not irritable. It keeps no record of wrong. Then he says this, it doesn't find joy when bad things happen to others, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. I wonder if you feel a little bit like me, where you're like, that's a high bar. So sometimes I think what happens is that we do one of two things. We either say, well, listen, I'll never be that way. And so since I'll never be that way, like it's a good thing Jesus died for me, and it's a good thing that I have Jesus because I'll never be able to live that way. And you know what? You're kind of true. It is a good thing. And we can't do this on our own without Jesus. But also, we're called, if we really believe, to actually follow the Jesus who showed us what love was really like. And so on the one side, we say, well, listen, I'll never be able to. And on the other side, there might be some of us who say, I'm already burnt out on trying to. Because we look at this high bar of love, I can't help but ask myself this question. Man, what would it look like in every interaction for that interaction to be full of kindness and patience? What would it look like? Like if somebody came into my workplace or your workplace and they started to ask questions about who do you think this person is, would the way that they describe you would be like, man, not envious, I'll tell you that. They're not self-seeking. You know, they always seek to put people ahead of themselves. Like, would that be the description of who we are? If somebody talked with the people who are closest to you, would they say, man, no matter what, I know that they're bearing all things, believing all things, hoping all things, enduring all things? The way that we live it, what it looks like is this idea of just saying, I'm going to show up and I'm going to ask God to empower me to be this kind of person. Because the truth is that if we try to do it on our own or if we just kind of give up, we miss out on the fullness of the beauty of what God has invited us into. And so when we talk about what is it, this idea of giving life to somebody else, this wholehearted commitment, when we talk about how to live it, being patient and kind, the last question for me is, well, how do you grow in it? And Paul gives us exactly what this looks like. He says, love never ends. It's an ongoing process. I don't know about you, but sometimes I get distracted by other things. That this past week, I got distracted, like we're trying to get this house ready, and so there's a lot of things that we didn't expect to have to do that now we're doing, things that we didn't expect to have to get done that now have to get done. And so, man, from early in the morning until late at night, I was doing all of these things. And what I noticed is I got so busy and so caught up in what I was doing, I forgot to look up and take care of the people around me. I forgot to look up, and there's somebody who texted me, and I was like, man, I'll get back to that text later. Or somebody who called me, and I was like, I'll get back to that call later. There were people that I wanted to go and say hi to and drop by some of y'all's doorsteps, and I said, well, I'll do that later, because I get caught up in things, because I forget that everything else ends but love. There's going to be a day where this house is shot. Doesn't look good, smells bad. The next people come in, they're like, man, this place sucks, right? Why? Because that's how everything goes. There's going to be a day where every dollar in your bank account, gone. Either because you're gone or it's gone, one or the other. It'll be one of those two things. There's going to be a day where everything that you love, that you pour your time and attention into, fades. But the one thing that remains is love. And so how do you grow in it? Paul says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put aside childish things. The way that you grow in it is that day by day, you grow in it. I know that you're like, man, I was hoping for something way more profound by that. But I'm watching our little baby Lively. She's growing up. And what happens day by day is that she started trying to crawl, and she'd kind of do this shuffle thing back and forth where she's just like crawling, you know. And then all of a sudden she's trying to stand up. And so she's starting to stand up, and she's wobbly, and she's trying to grab onto things, and she's kind of trying to take a step here and there. The other day she forgot she couldn't walk. And literally she was standing, and I saw her. She was just like standing by the couch. All of a sudden she just lets go, and then just boom, falls straight over, right? And that's exactly what happens when we're trying to grow in love. There are going to be moments where we forget that we don't know what we're doing. We just let go and boom, fall on our face. But it's day after day showing up and saying, I'm going to learn to love. I'm going to learn to be somebody who's patient, to be somebody who's kind, to welcome people into my home, that when I show up, I'm able to say, there you are, instead of here I am. You ever notice there's a difference between those two type of people? There are people who step in the room, they're like, here I am. And there are people who step in the room and they say, there you are. Man, I'm glad you're here today. But it's showing up every day and saying, man, I'm going to put aside childish things. And I'm going to grow. And I got to tell you that, man, when I look back on Matt Labby at 20, I look at some of the things that he was doing, and he thought that he knew what was up with life. And the truth is, I look now a decade later, and I'm like, there's no way. And I got to tell you, when I hit 40, like some of y'all are. I'm going to look back at 30 and we'll be like, man, Matt Levy, no. When I hit 50, like some of y'all are, I'm going to look, when I hit 60, when I hit 70, like some, I don't know if I'll make it that long, but man, if I hit 70, I'll look back and I'm like, man, Matt Levy had no idea what love is. But it's showing up every day and saying, I want to figure out what love is because I'm giving love a second chance. Here's what I'm going to invite you into this week. There's going to be a this week application and there's going to be a this moment application. This week, here's what I would love for you to do. Is for you to, even in the first 5 minutes of your day, maybe before you wake up out of bed and you roll out and you feel all achy, like, maybe before that happens, maybe before you roll out of bed, maybe on your drive into work, that you're just going to take one of these verses. We're going to go from verses 4 to 8, and then we're going to go verse 11. And you're just going to take that verse and you're just going to think about it. And that day, you're going to say, God, would you open up an opportunity for me to be this? Then on Monday, you're going to say, love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy, is not boastful, is not arrogant. You're going to say, Lord, open up opportunities for me to be patient, for me to be kind today. You're going to just think about that and think, man, what kind of person is somebody who's not envious? Why would somebody who's not envious be not envious? Why would somebody who's not arrogant be not arrogant? And then you're going to wake up on Tuesday and you're going to start off and you're going to say, is not rude. And you're like, oof, man. When that barista didn't get my coffee in time and I was all huffy and I gave them a list of 20 different ingredients they needed to get, and when I went to the restaurant and my meal didn't come out on time and I was and that person at work and they didn't get their project done and I was rude toward them, I was like, are you kidding me? I'm like, think, man, maybe I was rude. Wednesday, love finds no joy in unrighteousness but rejoices in the truth. And I'm going to start to think it bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Man, as I think about my spouse, am I hoping for them? Am I expecting for them? Am I believing in them? So each day this week for us to take one of those verses and to just think about it for 5 minutes and think, what would it look like for me to actually live this out in my life? And then in our response right now, my question is this. When we talk about love being a whole being commitment of self-giving for another, is there somebody that comes to mind? Maybe in your home. Maybe somebody that you've had a bit of a distance relationship for a little bit. Maybe somebody that has just grating on your nerves, or somebody that's got a list of wrongs as long as your arm that you're like, man, this person has wronged me over and over and over again. Who's that person? Here's what I'd love for you to do. In the seat in front of you, there's a little sticky note. I'd love for you to grab that sticky note, and maybe you can put a first name down, or maybe just put an initial, or maybe it's that person sitting next to you. Maybe just put a line or something. I don't like it. It's pretty obvious. You start jotting that down, but just put their name on there. Maybe their initials. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a chair down front, and we're just going to have you all come and put that sticky note on that chair. And what we're going to do after is we're going to do something called the liturgy of love. We're just going to pray over that chair, and we're going to pray that God would give us a heart of love toward that person, to understand that, man, what would it look like? What could you imagine the world being like if the church actually loved? If in your home, when you showed up, that people would say, man, I'm so glad that you're here. I can't believe that you're here again. I love that that's my daughter, man. Every time that she sees somebody she loves that walks in the room, she goes, ah! Like she's pumped about it. And I love that. And I would love if every time you walked in the room, people are like, oh, you're here. Man, I need to be loved today. So would you stand with me? We're going to pray. I would love for you to commit to each day this week, and we'll send out an email with, honestly, just that verse. We're not doing anything fancy. We're just going to send out the verse of the day, and then you can just go ahead and you can meditate on that. But what I would love for you to do in this moment is ask yourself the question, who is it that the Lord is inviting me to love? Who is it that I'm saying, Lord, I know that you've been working in my heart and my life, and I'm trusting, I'm believing that you can help me love this person. We're going to come down to the front. Just go ahead and stick that sticky note on the chair, and then we'll pray over that chair once we're done. So, Lord Jesus, we thank you for this time together. Lord, we thank you for your goodness and for the way that you love us. That you loved us first, and because you loved us first, we get to love. Would we be a group of people that is known by our love, that we would know that just like Jesus said, that they will know you by your love, that as people come into this place, as they belong to our community, as they are a part of who we are and what we're doing, that Father, they would experience this new reality of what it means to love somebody in the way that you loved us. May we be a group of people who is changed and transformed so that the church is known by its love. So that our homes, that we're known for love. Our workplace, we're known for love. Lord, I know that I need this as much as the next person. And so in that we worship and we declare that we're going to make room for you to work in our hearts and lives right now. That you would fill us up with your love. That you would fill us up with your goodness. That God, we would be different people because we've experienced the God of the universe. We declare that we will make room for you to work today. In Jesus' name.